welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph. How you doing, my exo friend, you?
Oh, doing great. I've been upgraded to friend. This is exciting. Oh, man. I was doing well before. Now, on top of the world.
I am glad to have been able to make your day. So, last we left off, we were just getting to the Staten Island Peace Conference. So, we're going to jump in back there. We'll talk about the conference a little bit and then finish out our talk about the New York, New Jersey campaign, and then jump into some specific battles, including talking about the very first submarine used in combat.
I've been waiting a while to talk about that.
I know. All right. So the Staten Island Peace Conference, just real quick. It was a brief meeting held in the hopes of bringing an end to the war. It took place on September 11th, 1776 at Billop Manor, which was the residence of Colonel Christopher Billop on Staten Island in New York. The people that participated in it were the British Admiral Lord Richard Howe, members of the Second Continental Congress, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Edward Rutledge. As we discussed before, Howe's authority was by design very, very, very limited. So, the congregational delegation was not very encouraged about the outcome of the meeting, but you still had to try.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So, this conference lasted 3 hours. And of course, as we know now, it was a failure. The Americans, they insisted on recognition of their recently declared independence. And Howe's authority, limited in the way it was not able to deal with their demands. So that, my friend, is the peace conference.
3 hours. That's well, I appreciate that it didn't take that long to figure out that it wasn't going anywhere. Because I've been in meetings that last a long time. And then in the end, it's like, oh,
yeah,
that was completely pointless. So for a peace conference, 3 hours, at least they figured that part out.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's been 3 hours. You have no authority, so you know what? Fight!
Right. Quickly, tables were overturned and cover was sought as the blast of cannonade was heard. Oh, wait, no.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Well, blast of cannonade. This is just a peace conference. That doesn't stop the fighting.
That's true.
Just to show you that while this was happening, Washington was on the move. He had previously been ordered by Congress to hold New York City. And, he had just escaped one trap. And he was very, very concerned that he had escaped that just to fall into another one. Because his army was still vulnerable to being surrounded on Manhattan Island. Yeah. So, in an attempt to keep his escape route open to the north, he placed 5,000 troops in the city. And he took the rest of his army to Harlem Heights. And when we cover it later, this is when the first recorded use of a submarine in warfare happened.
Interesting.
When he attempted a attack on the Royal Navy. But we'll get into more on that when we talk about that.
I'm going to exercise patience. This is a new XO that you're dealing with. It's just self-control, patience, and hopefully, what is the term? Thinking before speaking. That type of. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath.
Okay, good. Thank goodness.
So September 15th comes around. and General Howe lands about 12,000 men onto lower Manhattan. And he quickly takes control of New York City. I mean, 12,000 versus 5,000.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yeah. So the Americans, they withdraw to Harlem, and they have a skirmish there the next day with British troops, the Lobsterbacks.
That's right.
But they hold their ground. Howe, instead of trying to just, attack Washington in his very strong fortified position again, he decided to try to do a flanking maneuver. He lands troops in October in Westchester County and tries to once again encircle Washington. So, to defend against this, Washington takes most of his army to White Plains. And there's a short battle there on October 28th, and he continues his retreat further north. Unfortunately, though, those 5,000 troops he left in the city are now isolated in Upper Manhattan.
Ooh.
So instead of chasing Washington, Howe comes back to Manhattan and captures Fort Washington, taking about 3,000 prisoners.
Whoa. And I imagine, we talked previously about the prison ships in New York and how horrible they were. Is this where these guys are going?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to be good.
Oh, man.
This is probably when they're established, because now the British have control of New York.
Right. Oh, that stinks.
So these guys might have been some of the first to occupy those prison ships. So 4 days after this, Fort Lee, which is across the Hudson River from Fort Washington, is now taken as well. Washington himself, he brought much of his army across the Hudson into New Jersey, but was immediately forced to retreat again by a very aggressive British advance. General Howe then consolidates his positions around New York Harbor. He takes 6,000 men under the command of two of his more, he says they're difficult subordinates. So in other words, guys that he didn't like.
Oh, okay.
A guy named Harry Clinton and Hugh. And they were to take Newport and Rhode Island, which they did without any opposition.
Wow.
On December 8th. Then he sends General Lord Cornwallis to chase Washington through New Jersey. The Americans withdraw across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. So at this time, the Continental Army and really the Revolution itself was not looking very good at all. Thomas Paine wrote in The American Crisis, quote, "These are the best times that try men's souls." Very poetic for saying, hey, we're getting our butts kicked.
We are screwed at the moment. Yeah, they had a way with words back then.
Yeah. Now, at this time, Washington's army has gone down to fewer than 5,000 men that were fit to fight.
That's not very much.
Yeah. And it would also be significantly reduced even more once the enlistments expired at the end of the year. Because remember, at the very beginning,
yeah,
they were like, oh, we only need you for like 6 months or a year or whatever it was.
Right.
And so these enlistments are about to expire. So he's about to lose all these guys.
Man.
Because, your morale has been crushed. Are you really going to want to stay?
Man. No, probably not. You'd have to have a lot of faith, I would imagine, in your leadership and the cause. And they find out you were a soldier for the rebellion. That's not going to look good for you.
No, not unless some provisions are put in place to pretty much, absolve the fighters of, their quote-unquote crime of treason against the crown.
I think they did something similar in the American Civil War, where the Confederate soldiers were not prosecuted, but they were never allowed to hold office. It was something like that. Like you couldn't be in leadership, but we're not going to throw you in jail.
Right. Well, it also doesn't help because Congress also abandons their position in Philadelphia because they're like, the British are right there.
Yeah.
So if you got your leadership running as well, that doesn't look really good to the low guys on the totem pole.
Not at all.
Washington ordered the troops that came back from the failed invasion of Quebec to join him. He also ordered the troops from General Lee to join him after they escaped from New York City. Now, Lee, he didn't have a very good relationship with Washington. And he started making excuses. And he only went as far as Morristown in New Jersey.
Isn't there a university today called Washington and Lee? Is that where... Are these two the two guys that it's named after?
So you're talking about the university in Lexington, Virginia,
Correct,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's the 9th oldest college in the nation, and it is named after George Washington, Robert E. Lee.
Different Lee. Okay.
Yeah, because of their direct contributions to the school's growth and circular innovation.
Okay.
It used to be called the Augusta. It used to be called the Augusta Academy. So yeah, different Lee.
I gotcha. Well, I'm glad we sorted that out.
So Lee, he strayed too far from his army on December 12th, and his position was exposed by the Loyalists. And a British company led by Lieutenant Colonel Banstree Tarleton. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but it is what it is. They surrounded the inn where he was staying and captured him.
Oh.
So after he's captured, his command is taken over by John Sullivan, who finished the march to Washington's camp.
Nice.
So Washington eventually does get the guys.
Right. It only took Lee being captured.
Yeah. Now, of course, when Lee is captured, this presents Howe with a problem. Because along with a number of other army leaders, he had previously served in the British Army. So at first he was treated as a deserter. But Washington intervened on his behalf. And he got him being treated as a prisoner of war instead.
Okay. That's much better. That's the one that
Yeah.
they don't kill you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Now here's the thing, though. Once he started being treated well, he apparently offered the British commanders advice on how to win the war.
What?
Yep.
Duh.
And the Americans also didn't have a prisoner of comparable rank to what Lee held, which means there's not going to be a prisoner exchange. Nope. So he remained a prisoner in New York until 1778.
Wow. That's a long time.
When he was finally exchanged for a guy named Richard Prescott. So another consequence of how badly the Continental Army was doing, this allowed the Loyalist activity to start having an uptick.
It just reminds me of today, where your side is winning. Like, let's say your side wins the presidential election. All those folks kind of rise to the top, like, yeah, we got it. We're number one. We're in control. And I don't know. It's not a new phenomena.
So the British, they started actively recruiting New York and New Jersey citizens to build regiments of provincial militia. And they did have some success. Loyalists in the area were probably motivated by, seeing these guys that had their enlistments expire start coming home. and saying, "Oh, they're coming home. They don't have an army anymore. We can't lose."
Oh.
There was a New York Patriot militia leader that wrote that 30 of his men, rather than re-enlisting with him, signed up with the enemy.
Dude.
Yep. So on November 30th, Admiral Howe, he actually offered amnesty to anyone that had taken up arms against the crown, provided that they swore an oath to the crown.
Pretty sneaky. I can see that
Yeah.
being very effective, actually, especially at this point of the war.
Well, Washington didn't take it lightly.
Oh, I bet
he
not.
made his own. No, he made his own proclamation. He said that those who did not renounce such oaths would immediately go behind British lines, or else.
That's not where
In
you
other
want to
words,
be.
He's like, you made an oath. If you don't say, "My bad, I had my fingers crossed, I didn't actually do it," we're coming for you.
That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
So this turns New Jersey into a civil battleground with active militia and spying and counter-spying, and this stayed that way till the end of the war.
Whoa.
Now, when London receives news of New York being captured, General Howe was awarded the Order of the Bath for his work. And with the news of the recovery from Quebec, this told the British leaders that, you know what? The war's done in a year. We got this.
Yeah.
So the news of Howe's amnesty proclamation was met with surprise, because its terms was much more lenient than the government had expected. Because, during this time, leniency is not really that big of a thing.
No. It is in short supply.
Yeah. And the politicians who opposed the war pointed out that the proclamation failed to mention the primacy of the Parliament. And they also criticized him for failing to keep Parliament informed of the various peace efforts that he embarked on.
I think they just want to take credit.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, hey, you're supposed to talk to us before you do anything important, so we can say we did the important thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, we are almost done. The British then established a chain of outposts stretching from Perth Amboy to Borderton Town, where they start entering their winter quarters, because, winter is upon them.
Oh, yeah.
And fighting during winter isn't the best thing to be able to do. They are now in control of much of New York and New Jersey, and they had a really good position to finish off the rebels when spring came. Because Philadelphia, which is the rebel capital, is now within striking distance.
Oh, boy.
General Clinton detaches 6,000 men to occupy Newport, Rhode Island. He's going to use it as a base for future operations against Boston and Connecticut. And Howe sketches a campaign for the next year in a letter to a guy named Lord Germain. He was going to have 10,000 men at Newport, 10,000 men for a expedition to Albany, 8,000 to cross New Jersey into Philadelphia, and have 5,000 to defend New York. And if he had more troops available, specifically foreign troops, he would also consider moving against the southern states. Now, Washington, he is very worried at this time about how he's going to keep his army together.
Oh, yeah.
But he still organized attacks on, pretty much relatively exposed British outposts, and which resulted on, the British being continually on edge, because the militia and the army were still raiding them.
That's good. I mean, when you're that low down, as far as morale and position. Well, I mean, Washington has to do something, and those raids not only keep the enemy on edge, like you mentioned, but also helps to boost morale, at least in bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah. So mid-December comes around, and Washington plans a two-pronged attack on Rao's outpost in Trenton, with a third diversionary attack on Donop's outpost in Bordentown. His plan was aided by the presence of a militia company that drew Donop's entire 2,000 men force away from Bordentown, and this resulted in a skirmish known as Mount Holly on December 23rd. Huh. So because of this, Donop was not in a position to assist Rahl when Washington attacked Trenton. On the night of December 25th to the 26th, Washington took 24,000 men across the Delaware.
As captured in the famous painting.
Yes. And launched a surprise attack on Rahl's outpost. And they killed and captured almost 1,000 Hessians.
Wow.
This action significantly boosted the American morale. And it also got Cornwallis out of New York.
Oh.
He then assembled an army of more than 6,000 and marched most of them against a position that Washington had taken south of Trenton. He left a garrison of about 1,200 at Princeton and then attacked Washington's position on January 2nd. Washington repulsed him 3 times.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Once darkness fell, Washington then moved his army around Cornwallis, and he was going to attack Princeton.
I'm trying to put my frame of mind in the sense of, I know the eventual outcome of this right now in 2023, but being in that moment, just the audacity and the courage that would have taken, you know what I mean, and the tactical maneuvering to fight against what was at the time the finest fighting force in the world this is really a big deal.
Yeah. So the guy leading the advance guard to Princeton was a guy named Hugh Mercer, and he encountered the British under the command of Charles Mawhood. They, got into a fight, and Mercer was mortally wounded. But Washington does send reinforcements under a guy named General John Cadwalader. And with these reinforcements, they were successful in driving Mawhood and all of his troops from Princeton. A lot of them fleeing to Cornwallis in Trenton. The British lose more than a quarter of their forces.
Oh my gosh.
And with this victory, that skyrocketed the morale of the Americans.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. So these defeats convinced Howe to withdraw most of his army from New Jersey. He leaves only outposts at New Brunswick and Perth Amboy. Washington now enters his winter quarters at Morristown because, he's like, well, I've just retaken most of the state. I think I'm done for the winter.
Yeah, you probably didn't get to celebrate Christmas, so you got to take it easy.
Right. But this also puts them in a different position altogether, both armies, because now they're both foraging for supplies because supplies are limited. So this is what a lot of people describe as the Forage War, because these foraging parties started targeting each other.
It sounds like an episode of The Walking Dead.
Kind of. The British, they also sniped at each other over provisions.
That's desperation.
It is. I mean, they're not getting supplies from the crown. They can only use the supplies that they can find there. They're in a hostile land.
Yeah. This tells me the crown is not taking this seriously. Because honestly...
Oh, they never did.
Right. And this is just another piece of evidence that reflects that. Just the lack of manpower, the lack of supplies, the very low priority that it had in Parliament. It's just they at any time throughout this conflict, they really could have brought it to bear and just shut it down. And this is just another example of, we're not supplying our guys. They're not going to fight effectively.
Yeah, they don't take it seriously until the very end when they've already lost.
Right. That's like a country song, like an old country song. Like, oh, had I known. But then it was too late and she left me.
Yep. That's why all the X's are in
That's
Texas.
right.
Lord Percy, he resigns his command because of a number of disagreements with Howe over the ability of the Newport station to provide foraged supplies to New York and New Jersey forces. So at the end of all this, the British, they gained control over New York Harbor and the surrounding agricultural areas. And they held New York City and Long Island until the end of the war. The Americans, they suffered significant casualties and lost a number of important supplies. But Washington was able to retain the core of his army and avoid a decisive confrontation that would have ended the war for the, with the British winning. The battles at Trenton and Princeton had regained, the American initiative and boosted the morale. And the areas around New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut were pretty much just an ongoing, moving war until, the end.
That's so wild.
Yeah. General Howe, he sent reports early on to London about the battles of Trenton and Princeton, and he tried to minimize their significance. He blamed other people, like Rowell, and he tried to recast Princeton as a nearly successful defense.
Man, you get the Order of Bath, and then you got to protect that reputation.
Yeah.
Everybody else is.
Yeah. Well, he didn't fool everybody.
Okay.
In particular, a guy named Lord Germain.
Ooh.
Yeah. He sent a letter to the Hessian general, Leopold Philipp von Heister.
That is the most Hessian name I could imagine. That is amazing.
Yeah. He wrote, quote, "The officer who commanded the forces at Trenton, and to whom this misfortune is to be attributed, has lost his life by his rashness." Now, Hester, he had written a report to his king, Frederick II, Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, with news that not only had an entire brigade been lost, but 16 regimental colors and 6 cannons as well.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing.
This pissed off the king. And, he suggested to Heister in no uncertain terms to come home.
Really?
Yeah. So Heister does go home and gives command of the force to Wilhelm von, oh my lord, Kaipuschen? Maybe?
You can go with that.
Sure.
Just call him Wilhelm.
Okay. Wilhelm von, yeah. King Frederick also orders inquiries, very invasive inquiries into the events of 1776 that took place in New York from 1778 to 1782. These inquiries created an archive of materials about the campaign. Now, on the Paris front, the news reaches them at a critical time. The British ambassador to France, a guy named Lord Stormont, was preparing complaints to France's foreign minister, a guy named the Comte de Vergennes, about the semi-secret financial and logistical support France had been giving to the Americans. Stormont had learned that the supplies that went to America were to be shipped under French flags when they had previously been sent under American colors. Yeah, France is getting more bold.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote to London that the French court was extremely happy with the news that the French diplomatic position was noticeably hardened.
Ooh.
Quote, that M. de Vergennes is hostile in his heart and anxious for the success of the rebels. I have not a shadow of a doubt. So that is New York and New Jersey.
Well, hold on. You mentioned something about New York, New Jersey having a submarine.
Yes.
Or is that still to come?
Well, now we're getting into the battles.
Okay.
Which will include the submarine.
Okay.
The episode's not over yet.
So, men of high caliber, such as yourself, can sometimes forget details that may not, approach your notice because you're dealing with such high-level things, and it's my job to help sort those details out, you see. And so, that's the service I'm providing to you and the listener, you see? So, if you've got it under control, which I assumed you had from the beginning, it's all good.
Did you now?
Yeah.
Are you sure about this?
100% sure.
Okay.
Of that.
So, the battles are, going to be mostly ground battles. There's not too much naval action during all of this. So, luckily for you, the only thing extra we're going to be talking about with this campaign is the submersible.
Yes.
So we're going to get into that right now.
All right. I'm ready.
All right. So this was called the Turtle, or the American Turtle. This was the world's first submersible with a documented record of use in combat. That's important to say. Documented record of use. So, let's talk about its development a little bit. In the early 1770s, a guy named David Bushnell, who was a Yale College freshman, started experimenting with underwater explosives. That's fun.
That is fun. I only know one other guy that went to school to effectively study explosives, and so he definitely preceded the guy I know.
Yeah. So 5 years later, the tensions are rising between the colonies and Great Britain, and he has now pretty much perfected the explosives. So he begins working near Old Saybrook in Connecticut on a small manned submersible craft that would be capable of affixing these explosives to the hull of a ship. Or the charge would then be detonated by a clockwork mechanism that released a musket firing mechanism. more than likely a flintlock, adapted for this purpose.
That's interesting because I know a lot of the issues with muskets or any flintlock firing device is keeping the powder dry, because if it's not dry, it's not going to work. So I'm curious how
Yeah,
he solves
exactly. Well, the firing mechanism and other mechanical parts were manufactured by a New Haven clockwork maker named Isaac Doolittle. So Doolittle had the honor of doing that.
that. Nice.
So, go talk to Isaac.
I'll look him up. Of New Haven,
So
you say, right?
Yes, of New Haven.
All right.
So the turtle is named for its shape. It resembled a large clam as much as a turtle. It was about 10 feet long, 6 feet tall, and about 3 feet wide. And it consisted of 2 wooden shells covered with tar and reinforced with steel bands.
Hey, Isaac Doolittle died in 1800. I can't talk to him. Ah, Dale.
It's called a Ouija board.
Oh, well. Okay, I guess that's true. I should stop limiting myself and how I think I can accomplish a goal. Thank you. That's why you're the captain. You got the ideas. I'm sorry, continue. Brass band.
Now, the way it dived was by allowing water into a bilge tank at the bottom of the vessel. And they ascended by pumping water out through a hand pump. It was propelled vertically and horizontally by hand-cranked propellers. It also had about 200 pounds of lead aboard, which could be released in a moment to increase buoyancy. So look at it as like a quick release to do an emergency surface.
Mm-hmm. I imagine after all that hand cranking with the pump and the propellers, after a while, you'd want that emergency lift.
You're just looking at it the entire time going, all I gotta do is hit that lever and I'm done.
That's right.
This submersible was manned by one person. And it had enough air for about 30 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah. In calm water, it could move at about 3 miles per hour.
So in that 30 minutes, it can go 1.5 miles, theoretically, in calm water.
Theoretically, yes. It had 6 small pieces of thick glass in the top to provide natural sunlight.
It's good. Get that vitamin D. It's good.
Mm-hmm. And illumination while submerged was provided by a piece of cork that gave off a fungus-powdered bioluminescence foxfire.
That's pretty cool.
That's very cool. Now, when they did trials in 1775 in November, he discovered that this illumination failed when the temperature dropped too low. So, of course, they went to Benjamin Franklin for possible alternatives. But, this day and age, they really didn't have anything.
Right.
So they were like, you know what? We can't use this during the winter. So they put it on the sideline.
Wow.
So in August of 1775, the work got more attention when, Franklin was told of it. Because once you give Franklin the information, he's all for it.
Oh, yeah, I bet so.
Now, Bushnell, he was like, we need to be very secret about this. But of course, the news very quickly went to the British. A spy working for New York Congressman James Dewan sent a coded message to William Triton, who was the last royal governor of the province of New York. And this is how the British received word that the Americans were working on a submarine.
Ooh.
But the details were not accurate. They thought that the turtle was almost ready to be deployed already in Boston Harbor. In fact, they were really just testing the machine in the Connecticut River. But because of this perceived threat, in the spring of 1776, the British withdrew from Boston. They were like, we're not taking the chance.
That's really significant. I mean, certainly they didn't want to lose any of their capital ships, but just the threat and kept them at bay. That's really great.
Yeah. So after this, Bushnell then offers the submarine to George Washington to help defend New York City. And Washington was like, oh yeah, I love this. And he provides funding to Bushnell to prepare the vessel for deployment.
Nice.
So, yeah. So August 1776 rolls around, and Bushnell asks General Samuel Holden Parsons for volunteers to operate the turtle because his former pilot, who was part of the testing, he was sick. And here's the thing, it was his brother as well. Oh. So I don't know if he felt too comfortable in allowing his brother.
Yeah, that sounds more like it to me, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah. 3 men were chosen, and the submarine was taken to Long Island Sound for training and further sea trials. While these trials were going on, the British gained control of the western Long Island, and in August, the Battle of Long Island happens.
Oh.
So after this, the British now control the harbor, and the turtle was transported overland from New Rochelle to the Hudson River. So at this time, General Washington authorized an expedition by the turtle in the waters of New York Harbor. At 2300 on September 6th, one of the volunteers, a guy named Sergeant Ezra Lee, takes the turtle out in an attempt to attack the flagship HMS Eagle. She was moored off of what's known today as Governor's Island, just south of Manhattan.
Okay.
So according to Lee's account, she was towed by rowboats as close to the British fleet as they deemed safe. He then navigated for 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Before the tide made it possible to reach the Eagle. His first attempt to attach the explosive failed because the screw struck a metal impediment.
Ooh.
More than likely like a rivet or something. Or a nail, not rivet. They don't have...
Right. Yeah, I guess not yet.
Yeah. No, not yet. So, a common misconception was that Lee failed because he could not get a hole through a copper sheeted hull. Because there was armor, but Bushnell, he thought that it was probably because of an iron plate connected to the ship's rudder hinge. So Lee tries to find another spot on the hull. But he was unable to stay underneath the ship and eventually just, abandoned his attempt.
Oh, that stinks.
Lee reports that the British soldiers on Governor's Island spotted the submarine and rowed out to investigate just what the hell this thing was.
Right.
He then released the charge, expecting that they would, grab it, to see what it was, and then, be blown to atoms,
right.
quote unquote.
Wow.
But the British were seeing this drifting charge and were like, nope, we're going back.
Smart.
Lee reported that the charge drifted into the East River where it exploded, quote, with tremendous violence throwing large columns of water and pieces of wood that composed it high into the air.
Nice. Wow, that would have been super successful. Just a few. That's really impressive.
Yeah. So again, this was the first recorded use of a submarine to attack a ship, even though it was a failure.
Right.
But the records are only documented on the American side. The British had no records of this attack.
What the heck?
Yeah. A British naval historian named Richard Campton Hall, he said the problems of achieving neutral buoyancy would have rendered the vertical propeller useless. And the route that the Turtle would have taken to attack HMS Eagle was slightly across the tidal stream, which would, in all probability, have resulted in Lee becoming exhausted.
Right.
So he says because of this and other problems, that this story was probably just fabricated as disinformation and morale boosting propaganda.
Fake news. That's what he's calling it.
He said that if Lee actually did carry out an attack, it was in a covered rowboat instead of a submersible.
Way to minimize. I mean, that's really first-class narcissism right there.
Now, the Americans did try taking the Turtle out again on October 5th, and it was Sergeant Lee again. He attempted to attach a charge onto a frigate anchored off of Manhattan.
Ooh.
He reported that the ship's watch spotted him, so he abandoned this attempt.
Oh.
It is reported that the submarine was sunk a few days later by the British as it sat on its tender vessel near Fort Lee in New Jersey. Bushnell reported that he salvaged the Turtle, but we don't know what the final fate is.
I was going to say that would be from a, I forgot what the term is, underwater archaeology perspective, a shipwreck. That would be an incredible find. But apparently it was already found. But now it's lost.
He salvaged it.
Leave it to the pros, man.
General George Washington himself wrote that, quote, "It was an effort of genius, but that a combination of too many things was requisite for such an attempt to succeed."
Yeah.
In 1777, Lee used floating mines in an attempt to destroy the British frigate HMS Cerberus, which was anchored in Nantucket Bay. They say that the explosion killed 3 sailors and destroyed a prize schooner anchored astern of the Cerberus.
Whoa.
But it didn't, hurt the Cerberus at all.
Oh. Well, that's still significant, trashing a whole ship.
Yeah. The next year, Bushnell then floated mines down the Delaware River to try to destroy British ships off of Philadelphia. Now, the mines, they took a lot longer than they expected, and they reported that 2 boys investigating them were blown up instead.
Oh, no.
Yeah. On January 5th, they said that one of the mines struck a British barge, killing 4 men and raising an alarm. And this alarm made the British respond pretty much that anything floating on the river, whether it was a piece of driftwood or a boat or whatever, was now a target.
Whoa. That's actually brilliant if you could disguise it as just a piece of debris.
Yeah. And this was lampooned actually in a ballad called The Battle of the Kegs.
Nice.
This was written by Francis Hopkins, describing the attempted attack. Yeah. So the lyrics. I will attempt to do my best. Gallants attend and hear a friend trill forth harmonious ditty. Strange things I tell which lately fell in Philadelphia city. 'Twas early days, as poets say. Just when the sun was rising, a soldier stood on a log of wood. Nah, I can't do it.
That's pretty cool.
I can't do it.
I appreciate
now
you
without
trying.
practice.
I'm sure it took.
Anyway. All right. So in 1976, a replica was designed by Joseph Leary and constructed by Fred Freese as a project marking the United States bicentennial. It was christened by Connecticut's Governor Elsa Grazzo and later tested in the Connecticut River. This replica is owned by the Connecticut River Museum.
Nice. So I guess the plans were intact?
Oh, yeah. We have the plans.
That's cool.
A little funny story about this replica. On August 3rd in 2007, 3 men were stopped by police while escorting and piloting a replica of the turtle within 200 feet of the Queen Mary 2.
Oh.
Which was docked at the cruise ship terminal in Red Hook, Brooklyn. This replica was created by New York artist Philip Duke Riley and 2 residents of Rhode Island, who claimed to be a descendant of David Bushnell.
Huh.
The Coast Guard issued Riley a citation for having an unsafe vessel and for violating the security zone around the Queen Mary 2.
Okay. I didn't know that was a ticketable offense, violating the security zone of a vessel like that, but I suppose so.
Yeah. I am sending you a picture right now.
Oh, wow. That is not what I expected at all. That is a very small structure.
It's piloted by 1 person.
Yeah, and he does not have a lot of room, and I can see why there's only 30 minutes of air in there. That's incredible. I mean, it reminds me of, I went to the museum in Houston, the Science Museum, and they had, I don't know if it was an actual capsule or a replica capsule of the Apollo 11 mission, and that one was super small, and I just kept marveling that 3 men could fit in there for an extended period of time. It was just mind-boggling to me, and this is in that same category. It's like, you're going to be in this confined thing underwater. That's wild.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So we are going to. All right. So that's going to be it for this episode.
All right.
So any final
ideas, thoughts, comments?
Yeah. About the turtle?
A couple.
Or New York?
So, yes, the turtle is fascinating, and I'm really impressed at the ingenuity of man or humanity. What people are, what I wonder what drove this student to think, hey, I'm interested in underwater explosives. That's interesting, but then how he was able to focus that and turn it into something that was effective. I mean, there were other limitations that he had technologically, but all the principles are there. Using the fungus as an illumination device, incredible. Like, that's the technology they had, and that's what they used, and I'm fascinated by all of that. Also, things were really dark as far as the chances of the American Revolution to be successful partway through this episode, but then there were several morale boosts that took place, and so it's a reminder that even in your daily life, things could look really down, but if you persist and try to do what you can with what you have, you can have some successes that can turn it all around, especially when the other side isn't taking it seriously. And then that's the other thing. If you're going to do something, do it to completion. That's what I tell my kids. It's like, don't just half-heartedly clean up the kitchen. Do it until it is done. And if the British would have done that with us, well, I don't know. I guess we'd still be speaking English, but we'd be spelling words all weird like color and saying aluminium and whatnot. I don't abide that at all.
All right, folks, you heard it from the XO. The British are just children.
Well, no, in this circumstance, yes. They thought, oh, you ask a kid a question or tell them, hey, you should really do this. It's like, I know. It's like, you don't know. That's why I'm telling you. And the British, if they knew what they were facing and they took it seriously, it's all good. The British did a lot of great things. I'm denigrating them, but maybe they were overstretched. They did have a humongous empire. Who knows? Anyway, thank you for not paying attention, England. I love America.
Okay. So we are teamed up with HeroCards.us, where we honor one of our fallen angels at the end of our episodes. So today we are going to honor Lieutenant Colonel Bayard Wilson. I believe he is the oldest fallen angel we have honored thus far. His hometown was Buffalo, New York. He served in the U.S. Army with Battery G, 4th U.S. Army. His date of sacrifice was July 1st, 1863. Killed in action in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
He was 19 years old. Bayard was born to a prominent family in Buffalo, New York. His grandfather, Samuel Wilkson Sr., served in the New York Assembly and State Senate. Samuel was a founder and later mayor of Buffalo. He was a merchant, a shipbuilder for the U.S. Army during the War of 1812. The elder Wilkson is credited with bringing the Erie Canal western terminus to Buffalo, rather than to rival Black Rock in New York. Bayard's father, Samuel Jr., was a prominent attorney who left the practice of law to pursue a career in journalism. He purchased the Albany Evening Journal newspaper and later became the Washington bureau chief of the New York Times. Wow. After the Civil War, Samuel Jr. went on to be an executive with the Northern Pacific Railroad and considered to be one of the founders of Tacoma, Washington. Besides the family's success in business and politics, the Wilksons have a long heritage of military service in every American conflict going back to the Revolutionary War. Wilkinsons hated the institution of slavery and were active vocal abolitionists. 8 Wilkinson cousins served with distinction in the Civil War, with 3 of them giving their lives for the cause. Bayard was born in Buffalo on May 17, 1844, to Samuel Wilkinson Jr. and Catherine Wilkson. He joined his older sister Margaret, and the family later welcomed 2 more sons, Samuel and Frank. At the age of 18, Bayard enlisted in the U.S. Army and was commissioned as a second lieutenant assigned to Battery G, 4th United States Regular Light Artillery, on October 22, 1861. He fought valiantly at the Battle of Deserted Hill in Suffolk, Virginia, and the Battle of Fredericksburg, Virginia. He was promoted to first lieutenant on August 14, 1862, and on July 1, 1863, the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lieutenant Wilkson was in command of the 6th Cannon Artillery Unit. Brigadier General Francis C. Barlow ordered Wilkinson's men to move to higher ground, now known as Barlow's Knoll, where superior numbers of Confederate troops overwhelmed Union forces. Commanding his unit from horseback, Lieutenant Wilkinson's artillery was surrounded on 3 sides. A cannonball struck his right leg and killed his horse. Ugh. Wilkinson was taken to the nearby Adams County Almshouse, which had been pressed into service as a battlefield hospital. As Confederate troops advanced, surgeons fled the almshouse. Wilkson, at age 19, succumbed to his wounds. The account of Wilkinson gained national attention because his father, Samuel, was a special correspondent for the New York Times, signed to report the details of the fighting at Gettysburg. Knowing his son was in the battle that produced an estimated 50,000 casualties, which was combined Union and Confederate, Samuel spent days searching the gruesome battlefield for news of Bayard, finally finding his son among the shallow graves. In his page 1 dispatch for the New York Times, Samuel wrote, "My pen is heavy. O you dead, who at Gettysburg have baptized with your blood the second birth of freedom in America. how you are to be envied. I rise from a grave whose wet clay I have passionately kissed. I looked up and see Christ spanning this battlefield, with his feet and reaching fraternally and lovingly up to heaven. His right hand opens the gates of paradise. With his left he beckons to these mutilated, bloody, swollen forms to ascend. Some historians speculate that Samuel Wilkinson's words were an inspiration for President Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Quote, "We take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we're highly resolved that those dead shall not have died in vain, that this union under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth." Bayard Wilkinson was posthumously promoted on March 13, 1867, by President Andrew Johnson to brevet lieutenant colonel for gallant and meritorious service in the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He's laid to rest at Forest Lawn in his family's ceremony plot in Buffalo, with a headstone in the shape of an upright Napoleon cannon. So, Lieutenant Colonel Bayard Wilkinson, thank you.
Thank you.
So, please, take us out.
All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for listening to this episode, listeners. It's really great to be able to talk about history and naval conflict and what we can learn from it. If you'd like to reach out to us, tell us what you thought of the episode or anything else, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can email us. The email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach us on X Twitter, and the handle there is at US Navy. Hold on. US Navy History Pod. Is that right? That's right. Yes. Look us up. We're there. There's a search function in there and everything. You'll find us. We also have a Discord server. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And if you join, maybe you can see a picture of the turtle, or you can interact with other listeners as well and us. And if you have a question, comment, just want to say how great this podcast is and how it's your favorite U.S. Navy history podcast, we would love to hear from you. Speaking of which, if you'd like to rate, go to iTunes or your preferred podcast supplier and give us, 5 stars, I think is a good round number. Well, the bottom part is round. Yeah. So, 5 stars. Tell us what you think. And then we'd love to understand more about you and how we can help you. Are you studying for a paper? Do you have a test coming up? Maybe we can include some of those details that you need. Anyway, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks. Dale?
Well, as always, we're going to wish you guys a fair winds and following seas. Bye, everybody.